Welcome to Home Safety for Seniors. In this program, we are going to talk about frail elderly syndrome, what causes falls in our elderly parents and elderly adults. We're going to look at home safety tips and look at all of the assistive devices that are out there to help your elderly parents stay at home. I'm Pamela D Wilson, caregiving expert, advocate, and speaker. I am your host and your instructor for this program. As always, you know what's next. We are going to start with housekeeping. I'm going to take myself off the camera and move next to the slide. So you already know that I use the term elderly parent or elderly parents for the person for whom you are providing care, whether it is a husband, wife, brother, sister, grandparent, client. Doesn't matter. I use that term. The outline for this module and all of the modules is in the course materials. Do print this and the slide handout so that you can take notes, follow along with me. I put ellipses, those dots in the slides so that you can follow along. Let's talk about the objectives for this module, which is home safety for seniors. At the end of home safety for seniors, you should be able to identify safety risks that result in falls and gain an awareness of common home safety devices. There are so many to minimize injuries and falls. In this part specifically, we are talking about frail elderly syndrome. And at the end of this, at the end of becoming more familiar with frail elderly syndrome, you should be able to recite the symptoms of frail elderly syndrome. This is something that we want to prevent from happening in our elderly parents. You should be able to identify concerns to discuss with elderly parents about this, that offer that platform for encouraging your parents to work with you to take action to reduce frailty, falls, and unexpected accidents. If you joined me for the module called Signs Elderly Parents Need Care, Creating Strategies and Initiating Conversations, you should recall the discussion about geriatric syndrome, of which frailty is one component. This part builds upon the concept of frailty, how frailty relates to injuries and falls and leaving the home. Frailty is this broad topic that's not really identified by one single medical diagnosis because, as we know by now, multiple chronic diseases build and contribute to frail elderly syndrome in our parents. A loss of muscle mass, declining physical endurance, shrinking bone mass and bone density all lead to osteoporosis and a higher likelihood of fractures if a fall occurs. In the module called Activities of Daily Living, the Effects of Aging on Physical Activity, we talked about the importance of proper nutrition. The opposite of that, malnutrition, is associated with exhaustion, weight loss, and loss of muscle mass. We related chronic diseases to malnutrition and discussed challenges with dysphagia, difficulty swallowing, the benefits of protein supplements, and the possibility of skin breakdown that can result in severe wounds if there is illness in the body and if the body is struggling. We will talk more about skin assessments in this module, including how to identify risks and when you should contact a physician. Each module, as you are probably figuring out by now in this Caring Generation series, is like a building block. Each subject builds on the next to support the idea of taking care of elderly parents, staying at home, and we eventually get to that inevitable question of what happens when staying at home is no longer possible. By identifying the warning signs of frail elderly syndrome very early, caregivers and your parents can work together to treat and manage symptoms so that everybody can remain more independent. Let's talk about the symptoms of frail elderly syndrome and what you might already be noticing that you might not realize is significant. Symptoms of frail elderly syndrome provide examples of how these concerns happen. So some of these may sound familiar: low physical activity, unintentional weight loss of 10 pounds or 5% of body weight, physical slowness based on measured time to walk a distance of 10 feet in 10 to 20 seconds. That is that sit up and go exercise that we talked about. Muscle weakness measured by reduced grip strength. We'll talk about this. Reduced grip strength indicates muscle strength in the hands and forearms that is important for us to complete daily activities, but also for us to push up, to lift things, to do things that we do without even thinking about. Having 2 or more of these conditions are early warning signs that indicate that your elderly parent is advancing in frailty. It's time to take notice and to make some changes. Determining whether an elderly parent is frail can be accomplished through physical observation, so you watching and interacting with elderly parents. We'll look at individual aspects that contribute to frailty to help you make observations and to ask questions of your elderly parents to prevent or improve conditions, because, as we say, this is something that we really do want to prevent. So you might wonder, what makes a difference in elderly people who experience these frailty syndromes and others who seem to do just fine well into their 90s, even up to the age of 100. My grandmother was one of these examples. Grandma Mary, loved her very much. She lived well into her 90s. The differentiating thing that I can tell you about Grandma Mary was she was always doing something, always active. Grandma Mary didn't sit around the house all day. If the weather was good, she was outside. She loved to garden. She loved to walk. If she was inside, she was doing something with her hands because she had arthritis. She embroidered, she crocheted, she knitted. She would be listening to the radio. She would talk to people. She wasn't one to just sit in front of the television all day and, eat snacks. That was not at all Grandma Mary. She enjoyed being active. And I think that is proof that becoming older and sick, it is a choice. It's something that we choose many times, though unknowingly, because we don't know the benefits of physical activity. If we haven't been told about physical activity during our lifetime, it's not something that we realize can prevent all of these things that have likely already happened to our elderly parents. So let's continue to talk about symptoms of frail elderly syndrome so that you can notice them and so that you can help your elderly parents to feel better on a day-to-day basis. One of the main symptoms is exhaustion. For exhaustion, the questions to ask your elderly parents are: in the past several weeks or months, have you had too little energy or less energy to do the things that you want to do? Elderly parents who become out of breath performing any type of physical activity that results in exertion can experience exhaustion. The concept of exhaustion can be illustrated by a person who tries to walk an entire city block or climb a flight of stairs, and they become physically exhausted and out of breath. If your elderly parent is unsure whether they become exhausted or they can't answer the question, here's what you can do. Invite them to go on a walk with you. You will quickly learn by their ability to endure that walk or to become physically tired and out of breath. Next, you want to investigate whether a parent sits in a chair all day, sleeps all day, or has difficulty completing simple tasks around the home. If you're the caregiver, look at what jobs you are performing for an elderly parent already. What changes in the abilities of elderly parents have you noticed in the past 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, or a year? Those observations and those questions will help you answer the question about an elderly parent having low energy or becoming physically exhausted. In these course materials, I have included the Edmonton Frailty Scale. It's a scale used by healthcare providers to ask older adults a variety of questions. As with all tests, as we've talked about, the way that these questions are asked do make a difference. Questions with yes or no answers are a lot of times less effective because it's easy just to say no. And for that reason, I want you to have access to some of these scales so that you can look at them, add a dose of reality, that little grain of salt to the responses to be sure that if somebody else is gathering the information, a physician or a healthcare provider, that the answers really do reflect the state of your elderly parents' physical abilities. Let's talk about weight. For any person, including the elderly, a weight concern is a 10% loss or gain in weight. For a 100-pound person, this would be a loss or gain of 10 pounds. Based on my experience with my clients, any weight loss or gain of 5 pounds really in the elderly is a warning sign of potential issues. It's easy for the elderly to lose or gain weight without anybody noticing. Weight gain may not be noticeable because the clothing of elderly parents is typically loose-fitting or baggy. Concerning physical activities, the goal is to identify activities completed outside the home more than once a week to measure levels of consistent physical activity. If an elderly parent or spouse rarely goes out of the home, it's simple. That activity level is low because it's limited to the inside of those 4 walls. The exception is not going outside of the home if you have exercise equipment like a treadmill or a bicycle that your elderly parent uses at least 3 to 5 times a week, plus weights, some type of exercise bands, resistance type equipment to strengthen the muscles. Having and using exercise equipment in the home is a very way to maintain physical activity and strength if somebody does not go out. Compare the activity level of your elderly parents to what you do. What differences are you noticing? How often do you both get out? Do you exercise? Are they mostly sitting around the house? And again, very important, take a weekly weight on every Monday or Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. You do want to monitor those weight changes, and it's a good idea to do it for yourself because the minute you start gaining weight or losing weight, you want to start looking at why that might be happening. Let's talk a little more about monitoring physical activity. It really does involve everything that you do in a given day. You get up, you might take a shower, you go downstairs, you make breakfast. So again, it's everything that we do in a given day. And to repeat, the exception to not going outside is if you have that exercise equipment in the home, very important. Also, activities like this gentleman, going out and fishing, doing gardening in your yard, taking a pet for a walk, those are all very positive things for the body and for the mind. Let's talk about walking speed. Walking is affected by muscle strength in our legs and our thighs. If you take your elderly parents out for a walk and they haven't walked in a while, the next day they may have a lot of muscle soreness going on. It's also affected by poor balance and feet problems. If our feet hurt, we're less likely to walk distances. And if you recall the discussion about foot problems, do you remember how those occur? Do you remember what to do about foot concerns? If you don't, go back to the activities of daily living module and watch that section again. It's very important and very telling. The average walking speed of a human is 3 to 4 miles per hour or 1 mile every 15 to 20 minutes. If you walk or run, you know that this speed is it's a pretty good pace. It's not really a leisurely stroll. According to an article in Healthline, walking speed decreases with age beginning around age 60. Walking is a natural, free, doesn't cost anything, do anywhere activity that maintains our health and prevents frail elderly syndrome. Muscles and bones become stronger by walking and performing strength training activity. Balance and endurance improve. Elderly parents can measure daily walking distance using a simple pedometer. A pedometer counts steps by detecting movement. Some pedometers can also calculate calories burned. Any method that can be used to monitor or measure daily activity is positive to confirm that if you have agreed with your elderly parents on a daily activity goal, you can actually have them write down the steps of their pedometer every day and know whether they are doing that. And talk to your elderly parents about the idea of using a pedometer. It's an easy way for mom or dad to set a minimum threshold, whether it is 1,000 feet a day or 10,000 steps a day, which is a common gauge of pretty good physical activity. Even if walking is limited inside the home, it doesn't mean that parents cannot walk up and down steps, around the kitchen table, back and forth to the bathroom. Any type of activity is positive. Let's talk about the likelihood of falls. We've talked about gait problems, which is the idea of putting one foot in front of the other and walking. Gait problems affect 20 to 40% of people under age 65. So 65 or younger. And gait problems increase to 40 to 50%, so almost half of people age 85 or older. If you people watch, you will be able to see this. You'll see people walking and favoring one leg or one side of the body. You may witness somebody limping or having an uneven step. This favoring of one side or the other affects gait. For example, if somebody tilts or sways from the right to the left when they walk, if they lean forward, that is poor posture. That indicates an unsteady gait. An unsteady gait results from small injuries throughout our lifetime, like if we have turned an ankle, if we have had a sporting accident, any type of injury to our knees, to our back, to our body, that can affect how we walk. Older adults who have a fall or any type of injury are more likely to limit the level of physical activity because they are afraid of suffering another fall or another injury. But as we've talked, restricting that physical activity results in becoming physically weaker. Having one fall increases the likelihood of a second fall. Even small periods of inactivity, like an older person lying in bed for several consecutive days, results in lower physical endurance and a decreased ability to walk. These periods of inactivity have a significant effect on the ability of our elderly parents to maintain physical strength and balance. After lying in bed for several days, it can take a week or more of consistent effort for an older person to return to the prior level of strength and activity. We want to be proactive in identifying warning signs of any type of physical decline so that we can help our elderly parents stay physically healthy, active, and safe in their homes. This is an interesting one. Why does grip strength matter? Physical strength is related to hand grip strength. Hand grip strength is difficult to gauge for the average person without any type of special grip tools. Weakness in hand strength is recognized by difficulty opening a medication bottle, trouble using a hand can opener to open cans, screwing or unscrewing that lid on the top of a jar of food, and even struggling to twist that lid off of a bottle of water, which can be difficult. If you've ever seen those squeeze balls, a lot of times they're at trade shows or at events, people are giving them out. They come in different shapes and sizes. Using a squeeze ball can increase hand strength and dexterity if used daily. It can help people who have arthritic hands gain motion in their hands. A 2010 article published in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society found that healthy minimum squeeze measurements were associated with better walking ability in older adults. 72.6 pounds for men on average of squeeze strength. In women, about half that, 44 pounds for women. As we've talked, arthritis in the hands or any body part can make physical activity painful, but limiting physical activity makes it worse. It makes it more painful. So we want to be able to continue doing simple things like opening jars, carrying groceries, turning doorknobs, and we can do that by increasing our hand grip strength by using those squeeze balls. Frail elderly syndrome is a risk for people who want to stay at home. If we want to eliminate that with our elderly parents, it's all of these little steps. And I know they sound like a lot of steps, but if an older person would spend an hour a day going out to walk, doing some stretching exercises, strength exercises, using a hand grip ball, you would be surprised the change in daily life and ability that you would witness and that your elderly parent would start to notice if they do this consistently. Let's answer the question of how serious is the risk of falling. Physical weakness, poor balance, and falls are very serious problems for the elderly. Falls contribute to reducing physical activity, more dependence on caregivers, greater likelihood of moving out of the home, and premature death. We'll talk about some mortality statistics in this module. 40% of people over the age of 65 living at home will fall at least once a year. Of those admitted to the hospital after a fall, only about half will be alive 1 year later. So 50% of people who have a serious fall that requires a hospitalization will pass away in that first year. 30 to 50% of falls are related to the environment, which can be inside the home, outside in the yard, or another location. The elderly, because of their physical strength, have lower physical coordination, poor posture, slower and weaker reflexes, and less muscle strength and tone. That simple activity of just walking up and down one step to enter the house, to exit the house, it can result in a fall or fracture. Physical actions that we do to avoid falls include shifting body weight. You've probably done this if you've ever become off balance. You quickly catch yourself and you shift your body weight. Sometimes it's taking a step forward to prevent a fall. The most common fall types for elderly parents: wrist, hand fractures, hip fractures, and pelvic fractures, extremely painful. Wrists break from a forward or backward fall while we're trying to grab on something to stop that fall, or we use our hands or our wrists to brace us from falling and hitting the ground. Hip fractures are tricky ones. Those result from falls to the side when we physically turn the body or stand or walk. I have had clients who got out of bed in the morning and fractured their hip, or were trying to get out of bed, fell on the floor, and fractured a hip. Any fall directly onto that bottom can result in a hip fracture or a pelvic fracture. 1 second, the body's standing, the next, mom or dad is on the floor. How many of you have slipped or fallen on ice? Maybe you've missed a step and you fell and tripped over a pet and you fell. Happens to all of us. I have experienced falls or trips from every one of these. Seems like they occur in the blink of an eye. When osteoporosis, which is medical speak for weak or thin bones, exists, it's easier for a single fall to result in multiple fractures. A bone density test is a way to confirm whether bone strength or weakness exists. If you haven't had one of these, ask your doctor to write an order for a bone density test so that you know whether you are at risk for osteoporosis or an elderly parent is at risk for osteoporosis. Let's talk about what falls mean for caregivers. A fall without a full recovery or physical improvement means that more hands-on care is required from a caregiver. A weakened physical state is an ongoing safety risk that indicates an elderly parent probably will need more help in the home with activities like bathing, dressing, going out of the house, grocery shopping, and picking up prescriptions. As we've talked, exercise programs and increasing physical activity are solutions for frail elderly syndrome. Muscle weakness and physical weakness results from low activity and being sedentary. If they don't improve, the likelihood of falls and risks associated with injuries are only going to get greater. So let's talk about a summary for frail elderly syndrome. This section continues to stress the interaction between physical activity and good health. When we relate low physical activity to a higher likelihood of having a chronic disease, we can see how that simple action of walking supports good health, healthy aging, and helps minimize being diagnosed with a chronic disease. In many of my elderly clients, it was usually a fall that started a cycle, or a spiral as I call it, of my client needing more care. Those who were more physically active before that fall, I had clients in their 80s who would go out and still walk 2 miles a day, or who were very physically active, they recovered from that fall much better than someone who sat around the house all day, had a hip fracture, and then maybe recovered a little bit to the point where they were walking again. Some never walked again. Some ended up in wheelchairs for the rest of their life, and wheelchairs pose their own problems. They make people less able to perform physical activities. Skin wounds, wounds on bottoms, other health complications are just more likely to happen. With yourself, with your elderly parents, I know this is the broken record. It's that scratchy record that keeps saying, become more physically active, go out and exercise. If I can stress anything, that is one of the things to stress, because it does reduce the likelihood of chronic disease. Physical activity helps manage chronic disease, and it will help your parents need less care from you. So from a selfish perspective, helping your parents get out and walk, it helps you and it helps them. I'm Pamela D Wilson. Thank you for joining me so much for this segment. I will see you again in another webinar.